My good sis, Mari. Hi!
Hey, Mel.
It's like it's been like a decade since I last saw you, but in reality, it's only been like a month and maybe 5 days.
Maybe, and we definitely talk on a regular basis, so, But it has been a long time since I have seen you on screen and in this capacity, and oh my, what a month it has been.
We got a lot to, it's not even that we've got a lot to discuss. I think you and I have also just kind of like this hiatus wasn't supposed to happen, but I think it just naturally happened because of just like everything to process. I don't know if you've noticed, but I think the world's on fire. Like I'm genuinely like about to sign myself up to become a firefighter and try to do something because, well, I mean that in all the metaphorical senses of the like world that was on fire. But God, Jesus, what has been like, where do we even start? Where should we start?
Okay, first of all, I feel like we've been living in a firestorm since you and I started this show a year ago, and it's just been continued. But no, I agree with you. We'll start where we always start, and we'll say that we are still looking for justice for Breonna Taylor. Just because the world doesn't want to talk about it anymore doesn't mean that we're going to suddenly stop talking about it. That being said, where do we start? I suppose most people's logical start point in our 1 month hiatus would be us discussing the Derek Chauvin trial and his guilty on all 3 counts verdict. Because we say thank you, accountability, thank you. Because I don't know about you, Mel. It was a really interesting moment when we were sitting and waiting for the jury to deliberate. Because while we all watched as George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin with his knee on his neck for, as we found out during the trial, over 9 minutes, I still was not mentally equipped to believe that we were going to get any type of accountability, because historically, I feel like we never get that level of accountability. So in that entire day leading up, because for us, we had a whole day until the verdict, even if it was read in the morning for those in the US, where I was on edge, really sitting there going, well, if we get what we want, wonderful, and we will have a pebble in an ocean. But if we don't get what we want, then we genuinely will see a level of protest, dissension, and burning that is almost unimaginable and uncomparable to what we had seen in the year prior. But how did you feel during that moment?
I, first of all, agree entirely with you on like the fact that we had to hold our breath to see if a guilty man was going to be found guilty. It makes no sense. Like none. Because it's as you say, like the proof was literally in the videotape pudding, and there was no, like for me, it was just, there was no way that any jury was going to walk away from this not having, I don't know, I don't want to say like without not finding him guilty, but it's one thing if like, basically I was thinking a lot about the O.J. Simpson case for some reason.
All right, another polarizing trial. Please send us down this tangent.
Hi, my name's Melina. It's Tuesday, and we're here to discuss some things. No, so I mean, the way in which like people who saw O.J. Simpson as guilty and were like, there's no way he's not going to be found guilty. I just kind of was sitting there going, what if we get like O.J. Simpson and it's like, it doesn't, next thing we know, the jury comes back and he's found not guilty because of like that dumb reason talking about, oh, actually he didn't die from the foot on his neck. He died from the fumes from the exhaust pipe. Tell me why his face was there in the first place. But
I'm gonna let you finish that thought before I tangent on that one. But go on ahead, sis.
Like when you hear, when I would like, because I would tune in every then and again. I was not doing more than 20 minutes at a time because I need to guard my brain. But I would tune in from time to time, and I got to the point when the defense attorney was saying, oh, well, the fumes, blah, blah, blah. And I was watching this and I was like, you're telling me he's going to push forward this argument, yeah? almost like, well, the glove didn't fit, you must have quit. Like, the tail gas pipes, obviously, his face was in front of a tailpipe. I was just like, I don't, I was like, if they come out and they find him not guilty, like, there is some serious things that need to be addressed here. And I think it was just more of that. And there was that, like, sigh of relief, but then that almost, like, shock at being relieved. And then the sadness that came after that of realizing, like, wow, like, this person did genuinely commit murder in broad daylight. This was a modern day lynching. And yet I'm still sitting here, like, being relieved that Chauvin was found guilty of something which was absolutely the case. And I will say, commend, not social media as a whole, because again, I don't see all of social media. I will say I was very, very worried of seeing everywhere the George Floyd trial. And I will say I'm glad that at least it was recognized, like, no. The person on trial is not George Floyd. George Floyd is also not a martyr, Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, Lord have mercy. She's still in that kente cloth. Ma'am is still in that kente cloth. She hasn't come into 2021 yet. We're going to leave that alone.
Just little things like that. So that was how I was, but I purposefully kept my exposures to the trial as, like, short as possible, because I think it, ultimately, like, that is what wears you out in any case of, like, anything that we do regarding to this. Like, prolonged exposure like this will ultimately just wear you down to the point where, like, you don't even have energy to rejoice over a guilty verdict or, like, anything else.
No, and I think, and I joked about you taking the O.J. Simpson tangent, but you weren't the only one. And a lot of what I saw in a lot of conversations that I was in with people along those lines was not so much the, like,
if the glove doesn't fit.
If the glove doesn't fit, then we must have quit. Yeah, that line. But the polarizing racial lines of it, right? Black people wanted an acquittal. White people wanted a guilty verdict. And either way, you are going to see a clear and distinct racial divide based on what happened. I think the other trial that people talked a lot about, and I think when I talked to, like, my parents and others, had them holding their breath, was the Rodney King trial, right? We saw as that man was beat on camera almost to death. And then we watched as those officers were never held accountable for those actions. And then we watched as major cities in the United States had backlash and burning and looting and rioting. Honestly, rightfully so, because you saw again how a system was designed to work, and it was not supposed to work for Black people. And so I think even when I sit here, it's so funny, Mel, because when I think about not the prosecutor, the defense attorney for Derek Chauvin, and him saying things like, oh, it was his drug use. Oh, it was the tailpipe. And you ask these questions to the people that you put on the stand, right? And you had the medical examiners and the paramedics and others continually say, did you read the coroner's report? It was asphyxiation. I have not changed what I saw. I have not changed what I wrote. No matter how many times you bring up this narrative or create this image of an imperfect victim, this was still murder. If you watch the video, this was still murder. And so I think you're exactly right. You did feel a level of sadness when it was all over, because you recognize that people have been crying out for this level of focus on issues and disenfranchisement in our community for a very long time. And it took all of us being locked in our homes with nothing else to do for people to start to take note and to listen. And I think the saddest fact for me, and you and I touched on this, was it is really saddening to know that society impresses upon you the victim is the one who is on trial rather than the person who deserves to be prosecuted. And that says a lot about the way that we internalize this level of violence.
Decolonize your mind, baby. Decolonize your mind.
But I also think I was thinking about George Floyd, because I was saying in the wake of that trial, especially towards the end, when we were waiting for a verdict, is when we saw Dante Wright killed.
Yeah.
In the same city.
Yeah.
An unarmed Black man was killed by the Minneapolis police. In the wake of this thing, right, where we listened and we said, this is it. This is going to be the catalyst. This is going to be the movement for change. In a place where, give Minneapolis credit, they started to reimagine what their policing system looks like. They started doing the work last summer.
Right.
They have a very long way to go if we had a Dante Wright murder in the middle of a Derek Chauvin trial.
Like, I think that was genuinely, I had like, you know, this kind of like lamenting with my mom as well, where we were just like talking about this, and I was like, yeah, but even like Ma'Khia Bryant on the day of the verdict,
yep,
it was just like, so literally as we're forcing the wheels of justice to turn in our favor and in the favor of a group that has continuously been under the actual physical and metaphorical boot of the system, we also still see the other side of the system just spinning out of control, completely fine, doing what it needs to do, etc. While we out here pushing for change. And I think that was, you know, I think part of like that sadness that, you know, definitely I felt was on the one side, yes, in regards to like the verdict and stuff and the fact that like you felt relief. But it also, on the other hand, I was like, great, okay, justice for George. And then there's 700 other like people after that where you're just like, okay, and now we're picking up the next case file and we're going with the next thing. You know, even Ahmaud Arbery's killers, in regards to like what they were charged with federally, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think, you know, I tried to like understand, but in terms of federal charges, none of them have anything to do with like murder.
Yeah, so the new charges, for people that didn't know, so they're being charged in the original state, like by the state, in regards to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And separately and independently, the federal courts of Georgia have now taken up a hate statute and are charging them separately with hate crimes. Yeah. And saying that this was a racist and racialized manner. So it's two completely separate cases happening in the same state, happening in two different court systems, actually, in the same state.
Right. America. Simple.
Simple. Incredibly simple for all of our international listeners.
It's so easy. Just make sure you know what court you in. But yeah, no, I'm even seeing that. I was like, because initially I was like, wait, so I was like, were they not charged with killing a man? Like, they videotaped it themselves. Like, that's how that stupid that was. But like,
the audacity of caucasity can be very real, madam.
Oh, the gag, the gall, the gumption, the audacity, like all of it. But basically, like, it did just, I sat there and I also thought like, so on a federal level, we're not gonna, but then, you know, the hate crime part of it, I was like, that is something that is coming through, because up until like this year, you know, for the last 4 years, it wasn't a hate crime, it was free speech.
Yep.
And so now are like, you know, redefining those limits. And I think this is a conversation for like another time that's a bit more like, I don't know, not philosophical, because I hate to think that I'm anything like that. But because I'm not deep, I have deep thoughts. But
a bar.
Just saying. But like, essentially, you know, it does make me think like, it would be just what are we, I don't know.
No, I think what you're getting at is this idea of, we are taking this racialized and racist action and separating it from a murder, right? So we're saying, like, we're not even saying that these two things are necessarily correlated in one court. We are saying we have to look at them as two completely separate entities. And that is honestly indicative of a wider problem in the U.S., where we try to explain to people, and you and I have said it a million times on the show, we are fighting systems, not individuals. And that separation in itself is indicative of a systems issue. I think I said to somebody the other day, because Tim Scott from South Carolina, the senator, the Black Republican senator, after the 100 days address by Joe Biden, came out and gave his rebuttal and said that there is no racism in America, and America is not a racist country. I said, I don't know what America you live in, but I certainly didn't grow up in that America. But then, we heard from a lot of, breathe that one in. We heard from a lot of Dems, and they said, including Vice President Harris, who I do have a lot of respect for, but her rebuttal was, she kind of agreed. She didn't think that America was a racist country. She just thought that there were racist systems or racist histories that we needed to address. And what I will say to that, and I think this is echoing to the point that you were trying to make, is racism is so deeply entrenched in systems in America that for so many, you don't even recognize the way that systems are designed for you to fail. They are designed for you to be disenfranchised, and they're designed and allow for a level of, disconnect for people to be like, oh, it's not racist, it's just how it is. Well, that in itself is the problem. Exactly what you said, the fact that we weren't talking about hate speech 4 years ago, we were talking about free speech, and all of that is just because of a change of administration, means that there's a large pocket of the population that still believes in this free speech, not this hate speech notion, which says we still have an institutionalized problem.
Yeah. Honestly, it's like I say to anyone that tells me that, like, oh, but what about my freedom of speech? I'm like, yeah, but you're not free of consequences. So you can say what you want with chest and everything. Like, you can do whatever it is that you want to do. But again, if there are consequences associated to these actions and to these words, then you're not free of those. And, the point that I was trying to get at, which you did guide me through. Thank you. Yeah, I was just trying to say, like, so philosophically, are we saying that, like, the two are not related? And, I think even, like, when we look at, as the diaspora divas, and, when you look at, like, a not even a global context, but, like, in the U.S., it's very clear race is, like, that division and that basis for such division and segregation.
Definitely.
I think, in France, I would argue, if anything, that, like, they use religion as more of that, and that a lot of, like, the systems that are built, like, have to do with, unless you're secular, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, we saw that in those recent bills, in the bans of the hijab, etc. Yeah, no, fair point.
We'll have that call another day when we can get Sarah from the French chapter on as well. This is a call out now.
We're calling you out, Sarah. We know you watch this. Can't wait.
But, I think in the case here in the UK, it's a system that's based on, like, classism.
Yeah.
And that's based on the idea of, like, if this does not benefit the ruling conservative elite, then in reality, it's deemed as, like, the total opposite of, like, what's acceptable and what's needed. It almost, recently here we'll get into this in a second anyway, but, like, or a bit later, but, like, with the policing bill here and everything, there's this idea that, like, there's now, this kind of, like, thought police, if anything. And then I think a lot of people, at the basis of, like, why we keep having these conversations, right? Whether it's here, whether it's in France or the US, anywhere. I only use those three examples because they're the three that I know. But, like, we keep having these conversations to no avail, because at the end of the day, like, people are set in their ways to the point where it's like, so are you saying that I'm a bad person, that I'm a reason behind this, that, like, I shouldn't, do what I do because, and it's like, yeah, basically, yes. But, like, ultimately, even, I'm not saying who are we to tell people that they're having racist thoughts, but people would think that and think, well, hold on a minute. Like, the way I'm annoyed if this government were to tell me that demilitarization things are anti-government and, like, all this stuff, I'd be like, no, it's very actually, like, sound of mind for me to be saying these things. Obviously, again, I like to make this loud and goddamn clear. I am not saying that racists are sound of mind. I think that there is something that is severely off in your brain when you think that, like, you are a higher race, when in reality, we literally don't exist as races. We exist as one species. So I say that. But yeah, so, like, thought police stuff, And so even in that respect, it's like we have, even though Biden just came in, the midterms are in, like, next year.
A hot second.
Yeah. So
time slows down for no one.
that's one of those things that we need to keep in mind as well, in that, like, you know, I'm almost weary of putting out such like leftist, socialist ideals. For those not watching and listening, I'm doing air quotes as I say these words because they're just, I don't know, humane to me, but regardless, you know, we need to, I can almost understand why Vice President Harris was like, okay, yeah, no, we're not racist.
I like, this is the thing. Mel, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum on this show. And even if you go back to like episode 5 and episode 4, we discussed the ways in which Black women in particular have to maneuver a space and a framework that other people do not have to maneuver. She has to be coy. She has to be cunning. She has to be feminist. She has to be aggressive. She has to be smart and also not too smart at the same time. She has to be for the left, but also not make people feel alienated. I completely can recognize why you made the statement that you did. And I can also sit here and say why women like Tamika D. Mallory or Brittany Packnett or even Stacey Abrams to a certain extent can take a much harder line, because their existence and their rooting, in particular in grassroots organizing, allows them a different modality of conversation versus Kamala, who is the Vice President of the United States of America. I'm more so on the ilk, though, of that narrative or that rhetoric even being brought up in response to a 100-day speech, which in all reality talked incredibly minimally about race intentionally, because we were talking about things like infrastructure, foreign policy, nuclear weapons, etc. Whereas race obviously has an important place in the agenda in the U.S. right now, because we are really coming to a reckoning. It also was an unnecessary comment and added no value to the zeitgeist.
I see exactly what you're saying. Yeah. I think it is just, God, I don't know. You know what this feels like? It feels like everybody has that to-do list, right? Or something. And then you've always got that one thing at the top. Like for me currently, the one to-do list point that seems like it's never going to get filled in is like the research that I do for my organization, which it is going. I am doing stuff, but it's like, the goal seems so far away. And I just feel like on America's to-do list, race relations is that top bullet point that just never gets filled in, because things come through that take more, not even importance, but just like urgency. And it's so messed up, because like realistically, there's nothing more urgent. Like, why would you not want to provide the space to make sure that literally every citizen has the potential for greatness, and that you're not just like...
But there's also levels to this conversation, Mel. Firstly, I think you're right. I think it is the elephant in the room that people still don't ever want to tackle. But I also think that there's levels to this, right? Because if we're being frank, in the wake of all of the hate crimes against AAPI, within less than 100 days, we passed a bill on hate crimes against AAPI.
Yeah.
We have been calling for this level of focus, this level of legalization, this codification of rights and laws, and the ways in which they affect Black people in particular for generations. And think about the trouble they're even just have getting things like the violence and policing bill to the floor. Like, that's the type of things that make people say these conversations about, you know, the oppression Olympics, which I never subscribed to. But there is like this notion of your proximity to whiteness is going to pacify the ability to get things done. So when you play that out in society, it does not allow for that large elephant in the room that we were just talking about that doesn't take priority. Because how many times have you and I said giving power to Black and brown people means relinquishing power for others? Because we're not looking for equality, we're looking for equity. You can't just say now everybody has the same thing. You have to make up for the generations in which you have set people back.
That is facts.
I think that's where people are, to circle back to our original anecdotes around the Derek Chauvin trial and why you and I can both sit here in the wake of that verdict and we can say, yes, we are incredibly happy that there was accountability, because there was not justice. A man was still murdered. This verdict does not bring him back. That is not justice. It is accountability. And we can be happy and hopeful that his family and friends can get some sort of solace, some sort of peace, knowing that there will be some type of retribution for these actions. But as you said, we, in the wake of that trial, saw Dante Wright. We saw Ma'Khia Bryant. We saw Adam Toledo. We are reminded, and countless names before and after, we are reminded consistently that this was a pebble in the ocean. And so, even in thinking about the fact that we took a break, right? We took a break because we needed to process the myriad of things that were going on in real time so that we could even be frank enough and clear enough to have this conversation. But I think for us and for other people who choose to do this work on a continual basis, it is this constant roller coaster of, you can see something moving forward, but you can also feel the weight of all of the things that are holding you down. And we are right in that crux, because we are seeing things like that case where on the ground, somebody in Minneapolis is going to feel that. But when I'm looking on a large scale, we're looking at tons of bills that haven't made it to the floor, all of the voter suppression bills that are passing in places across the U.S. locally, all of the anti-protest bills that are clearly in the wake of BLM, all of these things that are just putting molehills in front of all of the work that we're trying to do. It's disheartening and just a reminder that when you're trying to do something right and you're trying to change the system, you are always going to have people that are going to push back against the change that you're trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, that, and literally silence you. Like, thank God you brought up policing bills, because literally, we discussed this at length as well in like our previous season and this current season, but the protests that happened here regarding BLM, I think, were like beyond monumental and historic, just because and again, I'm not English, so I'm not speaking for, like, do not take me as a representation. Yeah, I'm just a simple immigrant, just observing and seeing how the world works out from out here, behind my status, thank you. But like, literally, I think I don't think that these conversations had happened that way. And even, it's not even necessarily between just Black folks either. Like, I think that everything that it brought to light had other minorities turn around and go, oh, wow, wait a minute. We actually can relate. Like, I'm not too, and so I think that like that brought upon such a conversation that the current administration, the conservative government, led by Home Secretary Priti Patel, who, as you can probably guess from her last name, is like ethnically Indian, okay? South Asian. All right, cool. Just want to preface that, because she called the BLM protests of the summer dreadful. She said that it was, just so dreadful to see like all of this stuff happen. And gosh, not the statue of Edward Colston, a famous slave trader, like falling into the water, where probably hundreds of thousands of Black bodies also fell into that water that did not survive the trip. But I digress. That's a conversation for another day. We now get this, policing bill that's been introduced here as well, that essentially goes to lift police powers even more to like a higher, like lifting the cap on them basically. And this rhetoric came about also, again, it just made you want to scream. Like, there was a 33-year-old woman, Sarah Everard, who passed away here. She was kidnapped and murdered. And as far as I know, I don't have to say allegedly anymore, because like the investigation's been done and he's been like charged with it, but apparently it was a cop that did this to her. And so consequently, what does the government and Home Office think of at that point? They go, blimey, we need more police in the streets. No, like that makes zero sense. Because that was the mindset behind this bill, was that clearly the streets are not safe enough, etc., etc. Oh, and then also, you guys remember that crazy group Extinction Rebellion that shut down London for like 2 weeks, like last year or 2 years ago? Yeah, also, it's in response to that as well. Like, gosh, we just need more policing powers.
Just real delayed with their timing there, huh?
Real delayed, but you're doing this, introducing this bill after a summer of like racial conversations happening in the very country that created and exported racism and slavery across the world. Like, I'm just saying, right? But it is what it is. And then even the thing is, right, at first I was like, okay, well, you know what? Police always have like whatever that they need. Like, this is not, it's not new that police gets to have like all of these what's the word, powers that they get to just like use your better judgment and what you wanted to do in that moment, right? But genuinely, this law will literally make it that Gypsy and Romani traveler communities would like be creating criminal offenses just by essentially living, right? As nomadic peoples and as a minority as well in this country, they are also suffering at the hands of like constant police brutality, which is never highlighted enough here, which is made a joke out of in the sense of like, oh, those dirty gypsy, like I feel so gross saying this, but like literally that like the mindset is that like they're not human, that they don't belong. And literally the only way, I heard this from a Romani gypsy campaigner. She said that like the only way that you can qualify to be officially, in this country seen as a Romani gypsy traveler is that you need to be traveling for more than 200 days a year. And for a lot of them, like that's not the case anymore. Like, sure, maybe in the 15th century that was the case, but like that's not as much, that way anymore. And so it's literally, it just made me think about just like, in reality, this bill is going to silence anyone that has anything to say about this government, like in reality, that's all that it's doing. It's got nothing to do with making anything safer. They keep like, I'm sorry, but it's not safe for police to constantly be out either. Like you don't need, the response to issues in societies is not by criminalizing them. It's by actually addressing them and going at it in a homeopathic way, which doesn't involve violence, which doesn't involve brutality, which doesn't involve a show of force, but in reality shows like compassion. How are you going to fight the homelessness problem in Manchester when all you've got is tactical police van units that are just monitoring them, making sure that they're not taking any drugs?
Yeah. No, this is the thing. And I'll take 2 points to that. My first being, when they issued this bill, it was not a shock. I believe you and I talked about this on a few episodes ago in season 2, where we discussed the Free Speech Act. And we talked a lot about the ways in which the government were changing what was free speech versus what was problematic speech. And a lot of that, and a lot of that rhetoric was circled around the ways in which Black and brown and other minority communities were advocating for themselves in the wake of the summer of protests here in the UK. And, you and I have talked at length about what makes, the summer of protests here different versus the summer of protests in the US, and the way that it's going to manifest itself and the way that people saw themselves before and after. But the one thing that we can't acknowledge was the conversation was beginning. People were beginning to be open to having said conversation. And right as people were beginning to be open to have said conversation was the exact moment when we saw a very clear, concise messaging from the government that said, this rhetoric, this ideology, this is, and they were very clear about this is not British. We are anti anything that is not British. And if you are not succumbing to an ideology that elevates what we think as classic Breton, then we're going to deal with it. We're going to put a lid on it, and we're going to say that this is problematic. And what's really interesting is you outlined earlier about the ways in this country in particular is divided by class. But what's interesting here is class and race intersect on a really, really basic level. So when we're talking what isn't British, you basically said pre-Brexit, and we've all talked about why we think Brexit really happened. We're talking about anti-immigrant ideologies and a myriad of other things all coming to a head because all of the things that people are protesting, I think, especially in the past few months, are basic human rights, right? We're talking about equality in systems. We're talking about environmental justice. We're talking about, demilitarizing spaces. We're talking about seeing people as human. These are all what we would like to think basic human rights, but because they do not fit within a narrative in which we've seen in Britain, because we just saw that race report come out and they said that Britain is not racist. There is nothing that is racist in Britain. If it is counterfactual to the narrative, then it cannot exist. And all of these things tie together. And what's so disheartening about all of them is really what the summer of protest should have done and what we saw it start to do in some places, which I will give the U.S. credit. It did open a narrative, and we are having a wider discussion, and we have seen changes, and we are pushing in a much quicker way than I anticipated. On the flip side, it does this. And it does what we saw with things like the hijabi ban in France. It does the polarizing opposite, where it tries to quell and double down on what you are not, when in fact all you are showing me is you are exactly what I am calling you.
Yeah. That race report was 1,000% written that way to make sure that like any protests that would happen from then onwards as well would just be like, well, why are you protesting? The government already did the investigation. Ain't none of that in here. You wasting your time. Like, all of this stuff.
Well, that's because that's what people ask for. People ask for more inquiry. People ask for more transparency. And then this is what they came up with.
I threw my mug across the room. I swear to God. I could not believe, our WCAPS UK group chat was popping off because we were all just like, what? Like, are you serious? Like, are you dead serious? And it just went to prove that, like, all of our lived experiences combined, we can tweet and message about them as much as we want to. We can send letters to our MPs as much as we want to. Clearly, it doesn't matter. Me getting nearly spat in the face and called a monkey apparently doesn't mean anything. Like, at all. And I'm not even like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not even saying this like, you're invalidating my, like, no, because I know I lived it, so I know it's for real. So I know that if you have anything to say about it, you're just dead wrong and you don't know what you're talking about, and it's just never happened to you. But like, I guess, in a way, like what I was trying to say, even in regards to like class and stuff here, is that, way back when racism was definitely not a thing, because I mean, why would we even accept and recognize that other people could be at our level? Do you know what I mean? Like in the Margaret Thatcher era, like the people that kept being silenced and kept being put down and told, nope, shut up, there's nothing wrong, were like middle class workers and like lower income class workers and stuff. And like, a lot of, there's been protests in Manchester, and like I've been told that a lot of the mindset behind it is like there was a massive protest and like uprising in like the 1800s here, and instead of hearing what people actually had to say, they just sent out like the cavalry and they killed like hundreds of people, like hundreds. And these are not black and brown folk either. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I feel like this is the case where basically I almost want to like this, like I'm going to finish my statement with this, and bear with me. I'm going to try to string it together. But I feel like the difference that we see now with like the reaction to these social uprisings, shall we say, and protests, right, between the UK and the US, is that in the US, from the get-go, from the beginning, everything, like the way in which the system works is based on what's the color of your skin. Like, are you free or are you not free? And that's an irrefutable fact. Like, it's been recognized, and consequently, when things like big summers of BLM happen, it's a massive elephant that is incredibly hard to ignore. And thus you do kind of like mention, well, do you know what? I do see a trunk in the room, right? Like there's that mindset. Whereas here, it's a system that is not based on like, what's the color of your skin, but more, are you royalty or are you not? Do you have access to land or do you not? Do you hold a title here or do you not? And thus, when we see uprisings like BLM, it's just one of those, oh God, the peasantry is once again angry or whatever. Just give them something, make them feel better. Yes, we'll do an inquiry. We'll have a race commission, write out a report, blah, 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 blah. They'll forget about it. Because on the other hand, while it is, in my opinion, right, based on this system of class, when you add the racial elements to it at that point, that makes it even worse, because at that point, you can turn to the lower class white people and be like, oh my gosh, and you guys, you're gonna love this initiative. We're doing like 1 pound pint at Weatherspoons for the whole summer. Oh my God, isn't that great? And they're like, yeah, that's so great. I'm not even being rude right now. Like, I do apologize. This is such a crude rationalization, like a crude way of putting it, but this is the best way that I can think of putting it. And, I think that's the basis of why we don't see the same reactions like in Europe as opposed to in the US, because they can't deny in the US that is the actual basis. But here, because there's so much more history and it's so much more complicated, people are like, well, no, there's no such thing as racism. Because realistically, we should be mad at the Italians for when they were Romans, they invaded us and they colonized us and they da-da-da-da-da. I mean, you can if you want to, but that was 1,000 years ago. Whereas what we're talking about right now is now, today, and I think that's the mindset that people hide behind, is that well, we've just got a complex, rich history. We can't move away from it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
I think you're completely right in that, in the U.S., the way that the U.S. has always been abundantly clear, whether it wants to admit it or not. It is built on a racist system, whether we're talking about the fact that police were created as fugitive slave catchers, whether we're talking about people are 3/5 of a person, whether we're talking about the ways in which we look at things like the Electoral College. We can go through a myriad of things and explain the ways in which the U.S. as a foundational state was based on racist ideologies. And I think the difference is here, yes, it was still fundamentally based on racist ideologies because it's built on the backs of colonialism and you stole everything from everybody else. But I think what it did do, and this is to your point, was do a very good job of pacifying people to make them believe that you should exist in this space, right? Let's think about the terms that they used during the Windrush and other times when they were telling people to come and work and build Britain. The motherland, come to the mother country, right? You created this ideology in which you felt like this was also your space. So then when people got here, then you created divisions, ethnic divisions, whether that was, across Southeast Asian groups, across African versus Caribbean. Even if you get country specific, you created all of these interdivisions to say, this is why I'm not X, this is why I'm not Y, we're all just Z. And then in any moments when it became abundantly clear that these were issues of race as well as the intersection of class, because after a certain point you had to divide people by race and class, you then pacified people by giving them just enough to remind them that you're still British. And that's exactly, and in all honesty, that's exactly what we got with this race report. And exactly what you and I have talked about on a myriad of occasions on the ways in which things like the Summer of BLM have rolled out here versus in the U.S. In the U.S., you were having a conversation about how do we push legislation forward? How do we get rid of qualified immunity? How do we get legislation passed? How do we get our people in seats of power, et cetera, et cetera? Here, we spent a lot of the time having a conversation surrounding, oh, the system is racist. It is working against me. Oh, here are the ways in which it is working against me. Here are the ways in which I need to acknowledge that somebody needs to rectify or look into these systems because I wasn't even necessarily fully grasping the scope of the way that the system was working against me. And that was what this report was. It was, oh, you said that we looked into it. What are you talking about? No.
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing. And that's what's frustrating, is it's almost like you continually put people in a position where you gaslight them, where you make them feel like, oh, I must be crazy because, well, if that one person next to me can make it, then why can't I? And you create this, and you just create a narrative and a framing where people are crabs in a barrel, so they can never get to a space in which they are advocating together for the level of equality that they need or equity that they need. Instead, they are fighting against one another for the scraps and crumbs that you are giving them, because you just keep creating molehills and mountains for people to obstacle and climb and say, oh, I don't know why you can't do it. That's crazy. Shame.
Girl, not the scraps and crumbs. Jesus, save it.
Save it, right? Give me a whole pie.
I need the whole kitchen. Like, I ain't even taking no pie. No, I think it is entirely that, like, you and I have done a lot of reflecting, and not even necessarily, like, obviously we do, like, talk basically every day, but it's not even like we're checking in like this, having these, like, deep conversations every day. But clearly we both reached similar conclusions. So, like...
Our independent thoughts still led to the same end point.
To the same point of, like, so we asked for things and that's what we were presented with. So clearly, like, there is no real, I think we should, not even think of wrapping up, but, like, I'm trying to think of, like, how to try to give you and me some hope, and, like, our listeners and our viewers some hope, because it's a bit of a dumpster fire out here. Like, it is ghetto. Like,
I don't want it. You can have it. But no, I think, you know what? I think you and I, when you engage in these conversations, when you really take time to reflect on the ways in which systems are enacted upon you and upon people that look like you, it can be incredibly overwhelming. Because what you're constantly caught with is this thought of, I have ideas for how we could fix this, but you are also living in a reality where you know that even your ideas are going to come up against some level of resistance. And so I think I've said, I think I say this every show, resilience is an act of self-care, and it is an act of daily reflection. And so the hope and the optimism that I give to people really is, I stand, you stand, we stand on the shoulders of generations of people who endured unimaginable trauma, and who got to a place where you and I can sit on this show and we can debate things like the ways in which systems are enacted upon our people. We can have real conversations about the laws that we want codified. We can make real rationalizations for people's rhetoric, and we can sit up here and say how we want better and how we plan on achieving the better that we want to see, or the equity that we want to see. And so when I get weary or when I get disillusioned, I do have to take a moment and be really reflective on what is disillusioning me. What is making me feel so weary in this moment that I can't go on? Because in reality, these people put these obstacles in your way so that you will give up, so that you will not continue this conversation, so that you will not continue to fight. And so it is this thought that I'm not going to give anyone that level of power over me, over my family, over my community, because for too long, people have been fighting just for me to have a platform to say that I'm not going to give somebody power. Yeah. And so what I will say is, take time for yourself, everyone, and have these moments of reflection, because I think you said it best. You and I separated. We haven't talked about, we talk regularly, but we have not been sitting here texting each other about these issues. We got on the show today and had this conversation. These thoughts are our self-reflection of what we have seen in the past month. And the reason that I feel like I can take this and do something with it is because I know that there are people like you who are also still in this fight, who are not going to give up today, tomorrow, 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, 6 years from now. And so find your space, find your tribe, stay in the movement. I feel like we've been saying this for a year. This is a movement, not a moment. And it really is. And that means that it is a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes you're going to be walking. And when you're walking, just don't stop moving. And that's where we are. Just don't stop moving.
That was so beautiful. I have many tears in my eyes.
I do it all for you. It's all for you.
Thanks, sis. My gosh. No, but yeah, I completely agree. Taking time for yourself, it's vital. It is literally vital. Or else, what's the point? You're gonna burn out. And I'm glad that we took this miniature break. Because I think if we'd done this 3 weeks ago, you and I would just both be sobbing on the computer.
But now look at us. We're reflective and we're angry and we're revitalized and invigorated and ready to fight the power.
Yes, fight the power and fight the patriarchy and those racially charged structures. Sorry, I did not know where I was going with that one. I'm going to let you close today's episode. Clearly, I'm just on a...
I appreciate you so much. What I will say is, as Mel just said, fight all of the systems of power at B. Take time for yourself and be reflective and be honest with where you are. Be cognizant of all the learning you have to do and continue to push yourself to be better. Keep coming to conversations like this because we challenge each other and hopefully we're challenging you to think about things in new ways. Engage, and do not fall out of this fight because we need each other to push these systems, to break these systems and push ourselves forward. As always, we are so thankful that you keep coming back to hang out with us. And thank you for coming to Got Melanin.